The next session, the leading use cases, will begin very shortly. Please welcome to the stage Claire Barkley, David Schwimmer, and your moderator, Marla Gaonkar.
Good morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here. And let's just start off. I mean, maybe just to set the context a little bit. Yesterday, we had, NVIDIA basically add $1 trillion of market cap in 100 days. Not something I've seen in my lifetime as an investor, based on sort of $75 billion of GPU sales expected this year. We've had a lot of change in terms of what's the conversation is around generative AI broadly. We've had the move last year was all about how many trillions of tokens we can stuff into the training of a model, and this year it seems to be more about how small we can make these models for edge devices. How multimodal can these models be? What will happen with RAG use cases? What will happen around wider context windows, and so on and so forth. So our panel here is less about the what of AI and all the change, but in that dynamic context, how do you adapt as an organization, and how do you apply some of the infrastructure that's being deployed out there at vast scale very efficiently and well? And I can't think of really a better example of this than the partnership that's represented here on stage today between Microsoft and LSEG. And we're going to dive into how this partnership has evolved and what the really the whys and hows of that versus the whats of generative AI behind that partnership. So just to start out, maybe it'd be good to just get a little bit of a history, David and Claire, on the partnership and how it evolved. And just let's start with that, the story first, and then we can dive into some of the aspects of it.
So, thank you, Mala, and it is great to be here, and very happy to talk about this because I think it is a great example of what you were just touching on. In December 22, we announced a long-term partnership between LSEG and Microsoft. We had actually been working on it for about a year and a half before the announcement, and it includes a number of different areas where we are building product together. So there's been a lot of discussion historically about market infrastructure and data providers doing cloud deals with the various cloud providers. And there's a very important cloud aspect of what we're doing with Microsoft, but it's not a cloud deal. It's really about building capabilities together and bringing LSEG's world-class capabilities in data and analytics and workflow that really drives the financial sector, and combining that with Microsoft's world-class capabilities, also in workflow, a different kind of workflow, also world-class cloud infrastructure capabilities, and of course, AI functionality. Interestingly, I should just mention when we announced the partnership, that was only 3 weeks or so after ChatGPT had been launched in the world. So we did not actually put the partnership together in the context of the AI frenzy. There was a lot of underlying rationale and logic for it in many different areas, but I think the opportunity for us to partner and to use Microsoft's AI capabilities in our different areas, whether on the data side, on the workflow side, has been, I'll say, a very welcome accelerant as well.
Yes. Yeah, and to your point about AI not being the heart of the partnership, Claire, it'd be interesting, you mentioned earlier, was the three of us were talking ahead of this panel, how Microsoft's move here from more of a horizontal application to more of a vertical, deeper dive with LSEG has been really revelatory. How has maybe the AI context changed that as well?
Yeah, it's funny actually, David, thinking that it was a very snowy day in December when we announced that. You remember we were standing outside your offices, snow everywhere. And it's funny because it was 3 weeks after a lot of these announcements would be made. And I think David made reference to not just a cloud deal. And I will underscore that because it was actually part of the design that said, like, how can we do something that's just a bit different? How do you take the very best of the history and capability that the London Stock Exchange Group brings, plus slightly shorter history, 50 years of Microsoft, and take the best of the technology capability, and you infuse those both in collaborative platforms and in data. And I guess, perhaps the opportunity we've had since the announcement of the partnership is really how do you take that and take the very best of what we imagined and then infuse that with AI. And obviously the opportunity for integration of AI into collaborative platforms like Teams, infusing data from LSEG, combined with really taking the very best of the data platforms and unlocking and unleashing the potential of that. I mean, I don't know, for the opportunity together with many of hopefully many of the companies here, and unlocking that kind of capability to the financial services sector is something that we were already excited about it, but I think that the last year has unlocked even more.
Right. I think it'd be interesting maybe to get into specifics. And one thing that, if you look at the sort of wide range of applications and use cases, we could roughly divide them into sort of external versus internal, use cases. And so externally, to your point, Claire, around workflows, and I think the prior panel was talking about workflows as well. Yeah. What, David, are you maybe seeing in terms of external use cases that you're most excited about, whether it's meeting summaries or the Teams integrations? I think those would be really interesting for this audience. Maybe we can start out with that.
So on the external front, and I like the way you've set that up, because there's a lot that we're doing internally as well. The external example maybe that I should touch on first, and there are a number of them, but maybe it's a Microsoft product called Meeting Prep. And it is will be available in Teams. And basically what it does is that if you have a meeting and you want to prepare for that meeting, you click this button, and within less time than it's taking me to explain this, it will use Gen AI functionality to write a briefing memo for you that includes your information from your files, your emails, and if you permission it, your CRM system, and combines that with our data, public company info, news, pricing information, all the different kinds of corporate information about the person you may be meeting with. That's just an example. I call that a feature of what we are doing as part of a broader effort to really embed our data, our workflow in the Microsoft Productivity Suite. And so you can see how that will have a huge impact in terms of how people, there are lots of people whose job it is to prepare briefing memos. And so they will, I think, have to shift what they focus on. There will be more editors than writers. But I think that will be a very valuable feature. And that's part of a broader embedding of our data, our analytics, our workflow into Teams, where it will be fully interoperable, where it's single sign-on, and that kind of embedded AI functionality across many of the different features of how you might interact either with our workflow or with Microsoft's workflow.
Interesting. And what about Teams itself integrating into messaging, trading workflows, and other patterns that we've seen?
So Teams has a great chat function. And it is, at this point, for all of you who use Teams, it's an internal chat function. It does not cross companies. And I think I'll let Claire talk about this if people are interested in the rationale, but that is not a technological limitation for Microsoft. Microsoft could enable that if they wanted to. The issue is that in our industry, as you all know very well, as soon as you're chatting across companies, as soon as you're sharing models and sharing trading ideas, you get into compliance territory. It's a major regulatory issue, and we've seen a number of institutions in our sector have to address that after the fact in an expensive manner. From LSEG's perspective, we have messaging capability. We do the compliance. We work with the appropriate partners to have the storage of all of that and make that available. So the partnership of LSEG and Microsoft, we're creating, and we're referring to this as an open directory on top of Teams that will allow our users to communicate across companies with the Teams chat function. And you can see the power of that when I think your installed user base is roughly 350 million or so. There's not a huge adoption curve. There are other models in the financial sector for communication that are much more, I'll say, exclusive and expensive and anti-competitive. And this model will be the opposite of that in terms of we're not just creating a model where you have to be on Teams and LSEG to communicate. This is why we call it open directory. It will be an open model. It'll be an open protocol. So in the same way that you can text someone, and it doesn't matter what phone you're using and what phone they're using or what cell network you're on, we're going to create an open protocol in this open directory construct so that you can use Teams for messaging on LSEG workflow. If other industry players want to access this system, this model, we are open to that and we're welcoming that. So.
Right. No, that's great. And you raised the dread word compliance, accompanied shortly thereafter by the dread word regulations. And I think one thing that'd be interesting, Claire, from your perspective, to David's point about chat and the restrictions on chat across different companies, particularly in the financial services vertical. How is Microsoft changing its product development around being more verticalized, being more responsive in a sort of DevOps model to earlier in the product cycle around compliance?
I mean, actually, it's also part of the power of partnerships, actually, because what you have with Microsoft capability combined with the partnership with LSEG, you're actually getting the depth of financial services capability. But listen, I think your point on regulatory compliance is something that we take, like whatever the industry, you have to cater for different needs in different sectors. But everybody cares about their data, everyone cares about sharing, everyone cares about security. So I think there are some unique things within the financial services sector that actually LSEG and many of our financial services customers have helped us with the co-development on. If you think about, the many regulations that are pertinent to this sector, and so we've done a lot of co-creation. So if I think about the work that we've done with Barclays, for example, they've actually really helped us in the co-design of the way that Teams and many of the Microsoft 365 functionality is developed to make sure that, the recording, the publishing, all that kind of data, everything from Teams to Whiteboard to SharePoint, how we think about all of that. And those kind of engineering partnerships are really important actually for our product development. And I guess one of the powers of the LSEG partnership is we're doing that together with many financial clients globally to try and make sure that we're building products that are fit for purpose from the outset, because as David said, much of this, like federation on Teams, I'm sure there are people in this room that will federate with individuals that they know and you accept it, etc. So it is possible, but you don't want to kind of unleash that in a way that isn't going to keep all the data and the security safe. And the other thing I would say is, I mean, the example that David has given of that ingestion of LSEG data and serving that up as a product is an example of kind of the innovation that we're trying to bring as we think about AI innovation in Teams. So we'll obviously do all of our first-party innovation, but then if you think about the many data sources outside of the wonderful LSEG data that people will want to ingest. So they might want to call their CRM system, their SAP system. They might be, have some proprietary applications that they want to bring in. And the idea being is you would have API connectors so that you can actually, with the right permissions set up, you can infuse that data in. So Teams becomes the front end where you're able to service all of that stuff up, and you're able to have a very rich Copilot-enabled source of data to be able to make your tasks at your fingertips. So that's sort of the vision of where we're going to, and I think there's many providers that we already have those connectors in. And I hope with the work that we're doing with LSEG, you combine the other data into it, it really becomes powerful for the people that are creating those briefs,
Yes.
If I can just give one very real-life example of this. So Scott Guthrie, Microsoft's head of cloud and AI, joined our board as part of this partnership, and he and I have had a number of meetings with our customers jointly. We had one of these with our design partners. We have a number of major buy-side and sell-side institutions in a design partnership program as we're building a lot of these products together. And one of the first messages was, we periodically hear from Microsoft about some great new capabilities or some great new products, and we love them, but then they have to go away for a year or two and make them compliant for our sector. And as part of this discussion, and this is not rocket science, but it's helpful in terms of the partnership that we have. They said, can you build them in a compliant manner from day one?
Yeah, that's right.
And so that's part of what we're doing. And again, I think that's going to be very helpful for the industry.
Yes, and probably multiple other industries where you're taking this approach as well,
that's
right?
Exactly right.
Which is healthcare comes to mind as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, while we're on the subject of external applications, how early we are, right? I think one other issue that probably comes up a lot with this audience is just tech debt and the tech stack. And I think one thing that you have this fantastic story, David, about, this extraordinary data set. You have 25 years of tick data across, 5, and having to transport that by truck, 15 years ago, right? So now we're still early, though, I'd argue, in cloud, right? Let's leave Gen AI aside for about 5 seconds. And if I think about overall penetration, just North America, it's just barely over 30% of enterprise. So what maybe talk a little bit about just simple transition to cloud and how that enables much further enablement of some of the Copilot features that Microsoft is developing.
Sure. Well, as part of our partnership, we spend a lot of time talking about this integration with Teams and the desktop, the user interface, because that's very tangible for people. It's only one part of what we're doing together. And if anything, the bigger part of what we're doing together is migrating our data into an integrated architecture in an Azure environment. And so we have a massive amount of data, leading content sets in many different areas. And it's been built up, as you said, over literally decades. And of these many content sets, a lot of them have been built up with their own technology stack, with their own distribution, fortunately with a consistent data taxonomy, which is very helpful. But in many other aspects, it's a very complex estate. And that complexity makes it hard for our customers to use it and access it. If a customer says to us, we love your data in this content set here, we love your data over here, can you bring them together for us and allow us to commingle our own data with it? Sometimes we can. Sometimes it's a very manual effort. Sometimes it can take months to do that. But it's very hard. It's much harder than it should be. What we are doing, again, as part of our partnership with Microsoft, we're building an integrated architecture in a cloud environment around all of our data sets. And we're going through a massive migration that when we announced the partnership in December 22 was a multi-year migration. As the technology has improved even since then, it is accelerating, I think, more quickly than we expected. Yeah. It still will take a couple years. But it's a massive migration, and once we're done with that, and again using the Fabric platform from Microsoft, our customers will be able to use, access, manipulate that data in a much more efficient and flexible manner. And I think I can say we've sort of borrowed this term from Microsoft. It's basically liberating the data, and I think that would be very powerful.
Yes, certainly quicker than the ticker tapes being delivered in a truck.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's a good point on Fabric. I mean, and Microsoft over the past years launched obviously Copilot. 1 year anniversary there, with 150 new additions and at least by my last count. I'm curious, Claire, from your perspective, if you look at all the tools, developer tools, that's really, while we're on the subject of external applications, what are you seeing there that excites you the most in terms of some of those developer tools so that we can all write our own Copilots theoretically someday?
Yeah. Maybe I'll try and do it simply because I think David's right. Sometimes you can kind of talk about the Teams application and people really understand it because they use it every day.
Yeah.
But I think on both the data innovation and on the dev tool side, maybe I'll just characterize a little bit of what's going on. So David referenced this sort of use of Fabric for kind of bringing all the data together. I think it was referenced in the previous panel as well, but by the work that we're doing together with NatWest. But if you think of, for many of you in the industry, I'll look out, probably age-wise, I think I can carry what the reference I'll use. So if you think in the early days, it was sort of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and then we brought that all together into a suite of Office applications. The principle to think about with Fabric is everything to do with data analytics combined with security, bringing all that together into an integrated data platform, where rather than duplicating data from one thing to another, you are able to seamlessly integrate into that data, serving up rich data sets that people are able to manipulate. One of the things many customers struggle with is this sort of duplication of data in lots of different places. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and it means that you can't get the unlock. So we're pretty excited. It's an open platform, and the opportunity for that to integrate with lots of other data sets, even including competitive data sets, is something that we think will be a really big unlock for customers. And I think in terms of some of the feedback we've had already, I think this idea of sort of open data platforms, so if LSEG are servicing their customers, hopefully most of them are on Microsoft, but if they also have customers that don't, then they're able to serve those data sets and work that in the customer. So that's the thing to think about on the data set. And I think the work we're doing actually with LSEG is co-engineering that work to make sure that that's fit for purpose for the servicing of the financial service sector. So we're really excited about that. And that will save money, time, cost, and I hope will unlock some of this value that we're talking about. And you add the AI sprinkles all on top of that, and that's sort of where magic happens. On the developer side, that's actually, David referenced Scott Guthrie. It was probably one of the products on the AI innovation that was the first product to come to market. So that's, an acquisition that Microsoft made in GitHub. And actually, it was the first breakthrough, that sort of November time when the ChatGPT stuff came out. It was the first innovation of that as it got infused into the GitHub product that got a lot of people, including our CEO, very excited. I remember he was visiting London and spending time with a lot of government ministers. And he was trying to explain to them the concept of a GitHub and coding, which amused me at the time. But at the time, I didn't realize quite what revolution was about to unfold. And I think that, obviously we have unleashed that capability to all of our engineers. In excess of 50% of our code is developed using that innovation, so AI generated. And I think some of the time savings we're seeing is somewhere in the range of sort of 20 to 40%. Again, you look at developers, there's a task level. I try not to talk about it in day job thing because it's to do with they're doing that particular task. They're summarizing the code. They're creating the next thing. And so, our developers would say, like, once they have it, they don't want to get it taken away because it's a complete unlock. And if you think about the hiring of new developers, no one can get enough developers to do their stuff. Then the ability for young developers as they're coming in to have a co-pilot that's helping them with how to get the next coding, how to make sure they know what that's right. They're inspecting their code. They're making sure that it's fit for purpose. They're documenting it. They're looking for security flaws. They're doing that kind of stuff. So I think the transformation that I think we will see in the world of development with this kind of innovation is super exciting.
That's a really good point. That it's really, that's why it's called co-pilot, not pilot. It's really an augmentation of developer skill sets. Which is really,
that's right.
I think maybe in the time we have, we should probably shift gears to some of the internal application use cases that you're seeing out of generative AI. And we've talked about a few earlier, but it'd be really interesting, David, to get maybe a little bit of the sweep of how you're organizing that, managing that internally, and what you're seeing both in terms of how AI is changing internal user interfaces, and how it's also with process automation, maybe making things more efficient.
Sure. This is another area where we're spending a lot of time and have made actually remarkable progress in less than a year or so. And again, I'll give you one example. So I mentioned before, we have a vast estate in terms of our data and the analytics, and we have thousands of customers all over the world. We work with almost every major bank, most major buy-side institutions, with just a vast array both of customers but also the content that they're looking to use. We get a lot of customer queries in terms of how do I access this, how do I use that workflow, how do I do this analytic. We have about 2,000 people responding to those customer queries. And some of those queries can be very complex and very challenging. And what we've done over the past year is that we have created an internal model using Gen AI that basically absorbs all of our internal documentation on how to do certain things. And we have now armed our customer service people with that model. And as these thousands of questions come in by phone call, by chat, by email, et cetera, we're training that model. And that model is getting better and better. And now our customer service people are able to respond. We have had a 50% improvement in our customer service response time. And we are planning to get to a point where the model is good enough that we can just expose the model directly to the customers. We're not there yet, but I hope to get there perhaps next year sometime. So that's an example of dramatic improvement in terms of our internal efficiency, our ability to serve our customers. And it's sort of a classic use case because we have this massive amount of information that any individual cannot absorb or deliver, but the model is perfect for it. And I think I saw a week or so ago that Microsoft is basically creating this product, which I'll let you talk about, but it's a great example.
Yeah, no, and I mean ours is actually the product development that we're doing is off a similar need that we had. So you imagine how many support calls that Microsoft takes across all of its products from, people that query me because their son has paid too much on Xbox and they weren't expecting them to do so, right through to the complicated, Azure queries that we will get. And, that becomes a very expensive thing, whereas your business scales, you've got to scale all of the support to engineers and right from the front line all the way to the most expensive people. And so we did exactly the same as David has described, where we, both with our internal resources and also our outsourced providers, so we looked at the kind of co-pilot innovation that we could put in there. And that's both obviously we use Teams internally, but this is also looking at, the Dynamics co-pilot type platform that they can, run the workflows as well as having automation of queries and the responses. And we are at the stage where we can, obviously it triages it beautifully, but we're at the stage where we can actually see whether something can be auto-responded to. So we've kind of gone a little stage further where there are some things that are piloted because they have been answered so many times that that's the response that the customer is looking for, as well as updating what the code of record is. So the next person asks the same query, that's been updated as it goes along. And we mandated actually that the outsourced providers that we use also took that technology. It was part of the contract negotiation that we did. And actually, we've seen massive improvements. I think our reported savings for next year will be 400 million based on these changes that we've made. And it means that we've kept all the resources as they were, but we're not hiring at the rate that we were hiring because we can use this automation in order to do it. And our satisfaction scores have gone up significantly. So that's a really good example that I think is why we're thinking, wow, this could be a great product offering in order to bring to market. But there are other things I would say that have worked really well internally. I think a lot of procurement processes are an easy sweet spot for the way, looking at number of contracts that organizations have. If you can look at duplication of terms, is there a 1% saving you can make here, there, and everywhere? That kind of work is a very efficient use of AI. I think a lot of legal work that we use internally, and I would say also across legal institutions, they're seeing a very easy use case for that kind of summarization, workflow, summarization of cases, that kind of stuff. And then, as you would expect from Microsoft, we've put all of that capability into all of our frontline client people. So David was talking about briefs earlier on. We have a lot of briefs inside Microsoft. So, briefs, response to RFPs, researching on people information. So I think we put that into the hands of our people. I think it was rolled out quite slowly to start with because we were prioritizing customers, and there was definitely a FOMO thing that went on inside Microsoft. If they've got it, they haven't got it. We've now rolled it out, and I would say, definitely people are getting the benefit of that. The one piece of advice I would have for the people in the room that are thinking about it, though, is it does take change management. When you first look at it, you think, oh my God, that's incredible, it summarized my thing. And then, if you're not focused on it and you haven't got a good change management program, it's very easy for people to drift back to the way they worked previously. We're all very busy people. We've had our certain habits and patterns that we've developed over time. So one of the things we did internally at Microsoft was to really think about, gamifying it, skilling people, training people. We published league tables of who was using it, who wasn't, etc. And I'd say our sort of average daily usage is heading up to like 60%. content where people every day are using it now. Patterns are changing. People are starting their day by saying, summarize what's happened in the last day, so they can see all their files, they can see the emails that have come in from clients that they need to deal with. And that's becoming, therefore, more of an unlock as to how they're going to use it going forward. So
it's a really important point in workflow and workflow management. This came up in the prior panel as well. So, to your point about league tables, I mean, what is it? Is it more about just getting people used to it long enough so they can see the benefits, or do you think it's?
I think it's more systemic than that. I think it's basically changing the way that people work. So I mean, if I think of my own daily work patterns, I mean, I get a lot of emails from clients. So attend a meeting, or someone wants a meeting, or something like that, and I'm sure many in the room will share that feeling. And so your natural pattern of doing that, you may have people that help you with it, you may do it yourself, but you're generally thinking, right, I've got to do that, I've got to get that information, I've got to flow that. Whereas if you think about the use of Copilot, particularly if it's integrated with a CRM system and other data sources that I referenced earlier on, there is good capability already that if the Copilot can read the email that you've got, it can do a really good first draft. It can certainly give you a summary of the 10 most important emails if you've taught it a little bit about who are the people that are important, etc. So I think there's just a little bit where, rather than just doing your normal way of doing it, you kind of go, do you know what, I'm going to start with Copilot, and I'm going to help them be my editor. I'm going to help them get going. Now, obviously, there's definitely a human in the loop there, because if I was responding to an email to David, I don't think I'd just go with what the Copilot thing would say, because I'd want to put a little bit of personalization into it. But I think if it's responding to something where you have written to that person before, they know, it knows your style, it knows who else they are because it's got all the data, it can do a really good job of getting a sort of good 50-plus point email right. And then you become, rather than the original creator, you become the editor. And listen, this is this is minutes of time. But if you think about the duplication of some of these tasks that people are doing, and this technology is getting better and better all the time. You think about that infusion of data sources. It's going to get richer and richer. And the other thing I've learned probably is you've got to learn how to ask the right questions of Copilot. The sort of the rise of this prompt engineer, the rise of the promptathons versus hackathons. I think there's something about someone in our engineering team described it saying it's like having a really good grad or MBA grad working for you, and you talk to it like you're coaching someone. You talk to it like, if they get it wrong, say, actually, wasn't quite what I meant, like as if you were coaching someone. And the more specific you can be, the more descriptive you can be. You wouldn't if you had an MBA grad with you, you wouldn't just give them a short description. You would actually give them a task that would be quite expansive. And it's that kind of mindset. And so we're doing quite a lot of work now on trying to share the types of prompts that are useful. We're trying to create libraries for that, because I think that's the kind of stuff that's going to unlock things, that when you ask that question, what you get back is like, oh my God, that's incredible, as opposed to, wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I think that's some of the behavioral stuff that you've got to get people to work in a very different way. It's much more expansive, it's much more questioning versus the linear way that we were working before. So I think that's part of the change management stuff that certainly we're working with a lot of clients on.
Right. So it's triaging workflows maybe a bit differently than we had to before,
right.
And then really understanding the language, as you said, around whether it's prompt engineering or really internally as well. I wanted to leave some time for questions, but maybe before we go to that, we started this conversation talking about all the change that's happened even in the past year or so around expectations around generative AI and the actual infrastructure itself. It might be interesting to talk a little bit about looking forwards, how if generative AI wasn't even part of the conversation when you first set up the initial partnership, what could it be in the next couple of years that enriches this partnership even further? So I'm thinking about Edge AI in particular. Microsoft has launched this new generation of AI PCs, and I think generally there's been a lot of excitement around that. Some questions as well. But I think it'd be an interesting opportunity to sort of talk about, as you rebuild, David, what's happening with Workspace, and we have these additional edge device capabilities we really haven't a smartphone refresh cycle, I'd argue, since 2015, and laptops really just emerging now. What could potentially emerge? Maybe toss that out there for our audience before we.
So I'm very wary of predicting anything beyond the next few days.
Just for fun.
But I think the way I think about it is that our industry is very sort of set in its ways. And you touched on this in terms of how people, we all grow up doing certain things and using tools in a certain way, and the muscle memory kicks in, and it's hard to change that. If you take a step back out of our world of the financial sector, and you look at the tools that we all grew up using, they're, a lot of them are 20 years old plus, old technology, old user interface, very clunky. And I think what we're going to see with this partnership, but with the technology that is coming, AI being a part of that, is just a dramatic sort of rethinking of the tools that we use to communicate, to extract insight from the masses of information and data that we're all sort of swimming in, to execute on the various different roles that we all have, whether that's to execute a trade or to do any other things. And I think that kind of reimagination or reordering or restructuring or reinvention of a very large estate of workflow that we all live in is happening now.
Right.
And I think that's really exciting and really interesting. And it's a little bit hard to see what that means, because we all live in these daily routines where the existing technology and the existing workflow is part of what we do. And so I think the next time you start your day and you experience that and you look at all the things that are around you that you're working with, like, how could this be a lot better? Mm-hmm. How could this be transformed by technology, AI functionality, better user interface? I think that's what's coming. And I think that's really interesting, really exciting.
Yes, yeah. And the user interface in particular is probably the theme of this conversation that's changing quite rapidly.
Yeah, it is. And I think David's captured it well. I mean, predicting anything in this era, I think the one thing you can predict is change will be fast. I've had the pleasure of working in the tech sector for over 30 years. I've never seen anything like the last year. It's both exciting, breathtaking, and a little at times, But I think that both because of that, you've got to, you've got to think about that in terms of safety and ethics and making sure that we do things well. And we're certainly focused on what gets released and how we do that, and how do you think about the guardrails that are put around it because of the pace of innovation that's coming. And I think for all sectors that's important. For this sector, it's particularly important. But I guess I also try to think about what positivity it will unleash, both in the world of work but also in society. If you think about the role of every child having a co-pilot that will be helping them as a tutor, you think of the impact that can have for the NHS and for healthcare services. And we're starting to see, detection of breast cancer, what that means for waiting times, all that kind of stuff. So starting to see some of that unlock. I had the pleasure of spending some time with Mustafa Suleiman that we recently hired, and who's leading a lot of our work on AI with consumer, and we've just announced an AI innovation centre here in London. But it's trying to think about what the world will be, roll it out. What will the world be for every consumer? The idea being that everybody will have somebody that will be some form of co-pilot. Whether you're elderly and you live on your own, you've actually got someone that's there to help you. Yes. It takes a while to get your head into that, and it seems a little bit like watching a science fiction film. But actually, if you try and think of the positivity of that, there is a world that sort of, everyone at work has got things that will make their work a bit easier and can help them. It means they can focus on the things that are a little bit more joyful. And then in the consumer world, you've kind of got, we hope that this will unlock the next wave of generation of talent. I mean, who knows what the job market's going to look like? The job market will look very different. But I can tell you, because LinkedIn is part of Microsoft, people are worried about, there's a lot of people going, what's AI going to do to my jobs? There's a lot of people that are saying, I want to move job. And then there's a ton of employers that their biggest thing on their mind is, I can't find enough people. And we have more vacancies published now on LinkedIn than we did pre-pandemic. So unfilled vacancies. So the job market's changing right in front of our eyes. So I think that's something, in a way, positive to think about, that says, to David's point, things are changing, but actually, hopefully that could mean a greater opportunity for all.
Right. If you improve people's access
That's
to
it.
technology
That's it.
in many different verticals,
Yeah.
it should help. I think we have time for about a question or two. So I think we have microphones going along. Why don't we start with you? Get her.
Hi there. Question for David, I guess. You talked about the big migration across to the Azure platform and integrating with Fabric, which sounds very exciting. Presumably means your data will be much more readily accessible to the large language model suite that's in the Microsoft platform. How are you thinking that the commercial model will evolve? Right. So the derivation of data is a big unlock to not spiraling costs. Does any generative AI use of your data considered to be derived, or you can't guarantee that? So.
Terrific question. A couple things just to mention in this context, because it raises a lot of important issues that we have to address and we're in the process of addressing. First point just to make is that we're building this architecture in an Azure environment, and Claire made this point earlier, this is not data that's only available in Azure. And we will be serving our customers where they want to use it and where they want to consume it. So you have to build and architect it somewhere, and Azure is a great place to do that. But we are an open access model. We can continue to operate in that way. To your point, there are all kinds of interesting questions around, I'll call it broadly, rights management. And that's a big part of what we do today. And I think in this new environment, in this new construct, there's actually a lot more that you can do. And so you can build in this environment, you can basically attach metadata to each unit of data and use that to manage the rights associated with them. And then the ability to use that data in our customers' large language models, that's part of the discussion and part of the rights management arrangements that we have with our customers. It's a changing area. It's something that we also deal with on the other side. So we have exclusive distribution of Reuters, one of our sponsors here today, to the financial sector. And so that's a massive data set. And the ability to use news is a big, important, controversial item for Reuters, not with us, but news agencies and their content with consumers and with large language models all over the world. So important area, I think, in terms of how we're working with our customers on it, we'll have the appropriate arrangements in place so that, one, we can manage the rights associated with that, and that includes for onward distribution by them. It's a complex area, but it's something that is actually enabled better by the technology and the ability to tag the data.
Great. I think we have time. This gentleman here in the front had his hand up earlier.
Hi, it's Martin Coder from Swift, formerly of LSEG. And as someone who used to do meeting prep for David, I enjoyed it at the time. I'm glad I got into the AI game. I wanted to ask you, so it's great you have this 50% improvement in responding to customer queries, but to what extent are you using that AI to actually say, okay, why are customers asking us about this thing? Shouldn't we fix the thing in the business process in the first place, rather than put the sticking plaster over to respond to their query? And a question for Claire. So you can use Copilot and other technologies to create the first draft of an email interaction between yourself and David. But to what extent do you see the potential for actually automating that, synthesizing the conversations? You have a synthetic David, a synthetic Claire that can negotiate, I don't know, 20% towards the next stage of your deal. And in that future world, how would you judge at what is the point where you actually do need to then step in and take it to a human level? And perhaps somewhat related to that, it's not just your organization that's using AI. Obviously, your counterpart in other organizations are using AI to generate queries that you're responding at. So there's a bit of a data arms race there. And again, at what point do you see there's a kind of diminishing return of the value, the quality of the data when the data you're ingesting from the outside world is also AI generated?
Yeah.
Sorry, there were kind of two but related questions there.
Okay.
So I'll take your sticking plaster question first. We are doing that. And you have an amazing sort of ability to analyze the the inbound queries and go to the root cause issues and make things easier to use or more obvious to the customers, so they don't have to ask you the queries. So that's absolutely a side benefit, or maybe a core benefit of having that kind of capability. I'll let you answer the synthetic discussion between me and Claire.
The other thing I would say is on the Azure query and all the Xbox queries example, that updating what the source evidence is so that people do it in the future also informs future products. So it's a similar thing where you take all the queries, you can summarize them, that goes back to engineering, and we fix those problems in the first place, as well as what gets published. So I don't know where to start with your question, but I'm going to give it a go. So it's interesting. I think I'm going to start in the last part and work back to the synthetic part, possibly. So there is a parallel that you can think about that says, in a world where, I don't know, you're preparing a document for David. So if I go back to the analogy of the work that you used to do, and then David wants to summarize that work, and then David wants to take that and then give a long version to someone else or a summarized version to someone else. You could have a scenario whereby it's a summary of a summary of a summary of a shortened of a long version that's all AI generated, and people can be shortening it and lengthening it, and you're losing the sort of the essence of what the original work is, and perhaps there's too much work being created. So I think that's something that we have to think through in terms of the way that it's being used. And I talked about sort of change management and culture and all the rest of it. Like, taking someone's short mail, turning it into a longer mail, someone taking a long mail, turning it into short mail. Like, no one's, going back to the analog version, there's no good work in that. So I think it's really thinking about, the use cases that are going to really matter. And I talked earlier about not just Copilot and email summarization, it's the ingestion of all of the other data and the APIs that unlocks kind of what the real value is. And then you're focusing on things that you're just not able to summarize or things that you're not able to get. The example of a kind of summary and a long version is a much more simple version of that. So I think there's something in the way that the world evolves going forward that says it's not just the ability to summarize emails. It's not just the workflow, it's not just the underlying data platform, it's not just the security, it's the combination of all of those together. And if you add in secret source of proprietary data and other sources, I think you're going to unlock something that David and I couldn't write an email like that because we wouldn't have access to all of those bits. That I think is where the superpower is going to be. And I think if you're thinking in your own organizations, I think about, like, what's the proprietary things that you've got that means that you would unlock a different kind of value. Now to your synthetic question. So, maybe a synthetic version of David and Claire might do a better job of 20% negotiation. I don't know. Maybe that would take time out. I think, there's some very interesting innovations coming. Some of you will have seen the work on Sora AI model, which is kind of video and image generation. And actually, that's one of the things that we have put some guardrails around that says, look, this innovation is amazing, but we just need to kind of make sure that we've really thought about the ethics, safety and security of that before things like that get unleashed. But listen, I could see a time whereby there are versions of people that have the right security and privacy around them, where the first rounds of things or the first dialogue is actually happening because it knows me, it knows what I do, it knows David, and knows what he does. And it could almost be like, we did a brief for this call. Maybe the brief for this call could have been done by the synthetic versions, and then the synthetic versions are briefing us back to say, listen, these are the things that actually came out, and these are the things to have a look at. So I think there could be some quite powerful uses, if done well, that could actually be another speed up and a use case for that. And it might be a way that would be more engaging. Do you know what I mean? It might be a way that would get a different benefit from that. But ultimately, I think the unlock that we'll see in the next year is probably more focused on taking the work that we do and the complexity of the systems that we've got, and how do you think about those, those unlocks before David and I give up to synthetic versions of ourselves. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, good. I think that's a good note to end on. And thank you all. And thank you, David and Claire, for sharing your insights today.
Thank you.